Thanks, Danny. It's interesting because I know most of you either a little bit or pretty well. And so some of this information is going to be stuff you've heard before, but not everyone's heard it. I wanted to start off, actually, now that we're recording and getting more official, with a land acknowledgement. Something that we do in our CJCC meetings and something we're trying to incorporate it in other meetings as well, but it's a fairly new concept-ish. I hear other agencies and departments are doing it as well, but it's still slightly new. I'd like to acknowledge the land this meeting is being held on, the traditional homelands of the Salish Kootenai and Pend Oreille, and to acknowledge those tribes' contributions to area both historically and currently. I also then wanted to move into a brief introduction, though I think you all know me. So just really quickly, I am the project director, department manager, division manager for the newly renamed Criminal Justice Services Division. So we were the CJCC, but it was too confusing because we have a CJCC policy advisory board that our division facilitates and supports. And so we renamed ourselves so there we could get rid of some of the confusion. And it is a newish division. We're about 12 or 14 months old. We have 3 staff. We've got Quinn Ziegler, who's a data analyst. And we've got Laurel Hess, who does the public safety assessment coordinating. She's a public safety assessment coordinator, which is the risk tool used in pretrial decision-making. And basically the aim for today, what is the aim for today? The MacArthur Foundation, rightfully so, is really interested in ensuring that a lot of engagement occurs in every corner of every bit of work that's done because of the representation piece and making sure that all the voices have a chance to come to the table. I didn't really know what to expect tonight. We had a pretty good turnout at noon. There were about 25 people, excuse me, and had a really robust conversation with some really interesting ideas. So the aim of tonight's meeting is just to talk to you all about the MacArthur grant that we got and that we've been invited to apply for renewal grant for. Kind of what Danny was touching on is she worked on a kind of an initial grant that the MacArthur Foundation gave Missoula County to look at Native American experiences in jail and what could be done to, you know, if folks are in jail, what could be done to provide culturally relevant programming while they are in jail. And that report led to some really interesting outcomes. And then we were invited to apply for the Safety and Justice Challenge Grant, which we received in November of 2018 for $700,000. And with that grant came some, like a gap analysis and some other projects that helped identify strategies specific to Missoula's criminal justice system. The grant focuses, or it requires a focus on safely reducing jail populations and also addressing ethnic and racial disparities. So while we're having our conversation today, the ideas that we put forward to consider for the grant renewal need to focus either on one or both of those, because those are the 2 main pieces of the grant. The renewal grant is due at the end of September, and so what we're doing is trying every option possible to get ideas from people who have a different lens and different experiences that they might be able to contribute to making this a really robust grant application that's had a lot of thinking and consideration. I think what I'm going to do next is share, just for some context, I wanted to briefly go over the existing strategies in the grant that we have, so that you guys maybe can get an idea of what we're working on and what we could potentially put into a renewal grant. I know some of you are pretty familiar with these. Tom, this might be new to you. Just kidding. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll just start looking at the strategies that we're currently working on. And I'll go through and briefly explain them and then talk about where they're up to, because some of them have been quite successful and some of them have kind of missed the mark. Oh my goodness, I just closed the document, so it'll just take me a second. All right, can people see a document that says strategy 1 at the top of the paper? You guys all see that? Great. Yep. So we have 5 strategies and some of them have multiple initiatives, and I'm just going to do a brief rundown of, like I said, what they were meant to do and where they're up to right now. So the first strategy is to develop case processing efficiencies. Oh, I'll switch papers. So basically we're looking at ways to move people through the courts more quickly. Initiative 1 is to implement a differentiated case management plan. This initiative is meant to reduce the time it takes cases to move through district court. We're developing a plan through interviews with district court judges and clerks of court and assessments to create a new policy that will ensure those with felony charges awaiting trial in custody have a reduced length of stay pre-trial. This is only to reduce pre-trial time, not sentencing time. This project is ongoing. There's some dot points under here. Right now, we're working on drafting a differentiated case management plan. So we've done our interviews and collected some ideas, and we're hoping to have a differentiated case management plan draft available soon, by the end of summer. And next, and you'll also notice that there have been dollar amounts applied to each of these initiatives. This one was initially for $10,000, but we managed to find in-house expertise for that one. The second initiative is to create a jail review team. This group has been meeting weekly since about November, though recently held via email because of COVID and schedules. Our department generates a list of those currently at the jail in a pretrial status, which means that they actually have not been found guilty yet. And the jail review team reviews this list. The jail review team is made up of our chief deputy public defender, a city prosecutor, a county attorney representative, a representative from the jail, and our Western Bureau Chief of Probation and Parole. So upon review of this data list, the team will work to make a recommendation to the sitting judge for early release of a defendant who's in pretrial status. So sometimes folks get in jail, they get stuck in jail in a pretrial status for things that potentially we could handle out of court. And so that's what this team focuses on. The third initiative is to reduce time from preliminary hearing to arraignment. This has been done through collaboration between Justice Court and Municipal Court. The time from initial appearance to preliminary hearing for those in custody in a pretrial status has been reduced from 10 days on average down from 14. This directly reduces our pretrial jail population by tightening up court processes. Initiative 4 is assignment of defense counsel. This one's been done. It's complete with monitoring in place. So we're just following to make sure that folks who need public representation get it as quickly as possible, which also helps speed up the process of them being in the court system. Strategy 2 is to implement front-end jail diversion with prosecution. In a nutshell, this is a diversion program that sits in our county attorney's office. It was developed to assist first-time nonviolent offenders to avoid court and potential criminal charges. Each participant has a treatment plan specific to their needs and related to their charges. Upon successful completion, all charges are dropped. This strategy is complete and has established data metrics and reporting to track progress and efficiencies. They have about 30 participants in the program and have graduated 2 people already. Strategy 3 is the implementation of our public safety assessment tool. This project relates to providing judges additional information about a defendant's risk of rearrest or failure to appear if the defendant is released pre-trial. The tool provides a score based on potential risks that the judge may use in decision making. So basically the judge gets a score, and if the score is higher, then potentially this person has a higher risk of committing, of having a failure to appear or having a new arrest while they await their original trial. Montana has implemented a pilot project with this risk tool in 6 counties. There are concerns about how the data is being captured across all of the sites, of which is then being used to run performance metrics. So we found, being a part of this program, that there is some kind of inconsistent data capturing that we've been working with the state to tighten up a bit. Our department has been working closely with the Office of Court Administrators to address these concerns, and currently we feel the data collected is not robust enough to inform an accurate account of how the pilot project is going. So that's a little bit different than whether or not the tool is working. It relates more to data quality assurance, and we're working on that. Strategy 4 is to provide outreach and education about Indigenous cultures and racial disparities. So this is progressing the work that Danny was talking about earlier. Initiative 1 is to hire a so to continue cultural programming by hiring a Native American liaison. We had a person in this position. His name is Ivan McDonald, who is Native American and also has an MSW and was just about to finish his LAC. He took another position within All Nations Health Center, and we were going to try and rehire the position, but due to COVID, we're not able to get that position back into the jail right now. So we're looking at other ways to allocate those funds. Initiative 2 is to provide trauma-informed training to participating agencies, and it kind of pairs up with Initiative 3, which is to offer implicit bias training for all law enforcement. So these two strategies were progressing before COVID hit. I'd been working with some contacts in the Missoula Police Department and the Sheriff's Department to organize trainings. And we were also going to offer a third training, and this was at the request of those law enforcement contacts who wanted to do an LGBTQ I+ training as well. So we had plans in place. We're going to have to reassess those and probably do them virtually. So we do have money in our budget for training law enforcement and any other agencies that want to be a part of these trainings. One of the ideas that we had to, or a couple of the ideas we had to make this a little easier for folks to get to, is to offer kind of a rotational schedule over the course of 3 days. So people with odd schedules could come in the morning one day and attend one of the trainings, and maybe come in the afternoon another day and hit another training. We also were going to provide continuing education credit where applicable. So we've got to pick this up with a new lens at this point due to COVID. The last strategy is strategy 5, which is the implementation of sequential intercept mapping recommendations. And I know some of you are familiar with this and some of you aren't, but a SIM mapping, so the sequential intercept mapping project basically is a gap analysis of where, of what services are available for folks in a mental health crisis in different intercepts with the legal system. So it may be at 911 when somebody's having an initial crisis. What services do we have available in our county to get folks who are right at the peak of a crisis? You know, and then other examples are reentry or dealing with law enforcement. And so it's a gap analysis to see, again, what services are available in Missoula County related to mental health, depending on where in the legal spectrum you are. And there's a lot of information that came out of that. We got a pretty comprehensive report and an actual map that showed the services available. Some of the things that we're working on as a result of that are to establish standardized metrics and data sharing across agencies to improve data-informed decision-making. So MacArthur Foundation is really wants jurisdictions to focus on data-informed practices. So just making sure if you start a program, you have metrics to capture the efficiency and progress of a program instead of implementing a program without any way to measure its efficiencies. We're also, some of the strategies within this one were to work in the homelessness space. So getting a frequent utilizers list. Teresa Williams in the city's done a lot of this work already. So she's got a list of frequent users who are homeless, and frequent users are folks who tend to use services more than other folks. So maybe emergency rooms, or may end up being incarcerated, but they're all homeless. And so just looking at why they're frequent utilizers and what are the causes or barriers to secure housing. We also, I mean, one of the things they wanted us to do is improve intensity and availability of care in the mental health space. And this is where our mobile crisis team fits in really well, because it's another gap that we've had in our community that is really needed. I'm not sure, I think everybody probably knows what a mobile crisis team is, but I'll just briefly say that it's an independent team of folks with mental health training who are in our county are going to be dispatched by 911 calls that are mental health related. So instead of sending first responders or law enforcement, we're going to send folks who actually have masters in you know, professional mental health degree of some kind, whether it's an LCSW or an MSW, and provide crisis care at the scene and hopefully de-escalate. And then we'll have a third member of this team who will be a case manager and provide follow-up within the week after the call was made, making sure that they have somebody to go see or they have a plan for accessing care. And And that is kind of the gist of our strategies. It's a lot of information, and I just wanted to stop here and see if anybody had any questions about any of those.
I guess I had questions. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I guess I had questions on the risk assessment piece, and there are questions around kind of the, I don't know if you would say like the racial and gender bias that is sometimes within those. And I didn't know if that's something that's being discussed and there are different tools that can be used that maybe, yeah, are more appropriate for different populations. And
yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So I don't actually know how old this tool is, but it's been kind of the bee's knees since it came out. It's been a really different way to just assume release in the pretrial space and to try and provide some information for judges to have so that they can feel like they're making an informed decision. In the last 6 months to a year, there has been a lot of talk about whether or not there's some built-in bias within the tool. And there are different approaches to that. Some people, like I know in Alaska, they have, I think on a statewide level, actually, yeah, sorry, it is a statewide level. They have taken this tool and modified it and validated it for use in rural areas for Native American populations. I think in general, people think it's more helpful than not, but I think that depending on who you talk to, you might have get different information in that space. And we're trying to figure that out here as well. We are just in a pilot project phase. So this was mandated by statute by the Montana Supreme Court for 6 counties, well, 5 counties originally, to participate in a pilot project. So we're giving it the sniff test right now to see if it's going to be a useful tool here in Montana, but definitely there have been talks about the potential built-in biases.
I think I was just on a panel and someone was talking about the gender piece, which I think is maybe another just lens to take to the tool and see.
Yeah. So the tool has 9 factors. It was validated using, I think now, over 1 million different cases, and trying to identify what factors actually lead to FTAs and rearrest. And I think the list was pretty long at first, and they narrowed it down to 9 factors. And some of those factors can be affected by, racist arrest practices, or just certain personality types.
Right, they aren't malleable. Like however many arrests you get kind of feeds into that assessment. And so
yeah, and a few other things as well. So given the idea behind, it's an awesome idea. I think there's a little more work to be done in that space, and that's certainly something we could talk about some more as well. It's a really good point. At this point, I'm gonna find my notes. I just wanted to open it up really for a discussion. So, some of the things we talked about earlier today, some of the ideas, people were wondering if we could write in some money for a community engagement RFP. So we would hire somebody to do community engagement specifically in the criminal justice space. And these are all just ideas. Job training. Somebody was proposing that we have job training, maybe looking at the programming in our jail to include things that are kind of more research-based, proven effective programming in the jail for folks to hopefully reduce recidivism. Another person was wondering about rental assistance and housing vouchers. And I actually am going to talk to Tom about that later because we need to figure some of this stuff out. Maybe Tom, can you answer that question right now? Do you know off the bat if the grant can have money set aside for rental assistance and housing vouchers, or is that?
That hasn't been done in other locations. It's been asked about though.
Mm-hmm.
And the foundation generally is not in favor of it because it is grant funds and grant funds go away. Mm-hmm. And they're worried about the longevity and leaving people without housing when the grant goes away.
Yeah, great, thank you.
This is Jim. I was just going to say that we have a grant that's only about $10,000 to assist with rental for those who are returning citizens.
Great.
And we have other funds that we've targeted toward those who are returning, and that could be out of the jail as well. It's not.
Excellent.
It's for Deer Lodge or the women's prison.
Is that funding? It's available right now?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Another idea that was put forward was a juvenile homeless shelter, and there are, I forget the term she used. It was Representative Dudick who mentioned this, but there's a parental issue where in Montana you have to have a parent's permission to let a child stay in a homeless shelter. So this is a legislative issue, but it's certainly a big gap in our system because a lot of times homeless teens are leaving because of the situation at home. So having to get permission from their parents to go to a shelter it's not effective. So this one, again, would take a legislative change, but there's a lot of interest in chasing that up, which I think is pretty cool.
So Kristen, just again, we just got awarded $452,000 for a youth homeless demonstration project, but over a 2-year period. That will cover those 18 to 24. So you're right. We do have in Montana this idea that children are chattel, and other states view it differently, that children have a right to make certain decisions at certain times. But Montana, you have that parental interference that can be brought against you. And I think in Montana, it's a misdemeanor. I don't know anybody's ever been prosecuted, but it does sort of make you as a human service provider freeze as somebody comes in and accuses you of all kinds of things because you're dealing with their child under 18.
Yeah. It's a great idea. I mean, some of these things are really high level and would take some, legislative changes, but why not? If we're looking at making a more efficient system, sometimes these big decisions need to be made. We've just been joined by Judge Halligan, who is a district court judge for folks who don't know, and she's also the chair of the CJCC. Judge, we have a pretty small group this afternoon, and so it's a little, we did introductions tonight, so I just thought I'd introduce you really quickly.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Kristen, I have a question for both you and maybe Jim or someone else can answer this. So is that the same kind of laws that I have heard from people at the jail, that you can't provide like mental health counseling or whatever to juveniles without parental consent, and often the parent can't be found or isn't around? I mean, would that be something that then could, maybe if you're going to change legislation for that juvenile home, that could be changed too?
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We have an attorney, and a judge on the call here, but my understanding, when you're dealing with health, that you have a little bit more freedom as a practitioner. What I've always been told, I've been an LCPC for 35 years now, and I sit on a board of a community health center in another county. And so we have this question all the time, and what we've been told is that, number one, if the child that's under 18 is not being is not covered by a parental insurance plan and is not there under the auspice of the parent paying for the service, that at about 16 to 18 in there, that the child, and again I use that word because that's under 18, but they're really more adult given what they've been through, does have a right to make choices for their health care up to a certain limit. And of course we get into all of the things about, especially, with women's choice. And so you've been around for years on that one, Terry. So, but outside of that,
but I mean, while they're incarcerated.
Well, while they're incarcerated, I don't know, but when they're not, and oftentimes they're released very early, and then they do go to mental health or to community health centers asking for care. And my understanding is they can be treated, except if they try to bill their parents' insurance, and there's some technicality there. That's sort of the practical event that most folks ask the young person, that younger adult.
Yeah, so Morgan, we got work to do in our subcommittee. So some of the other ideas that we've been floating around are a Native American diversion team. So one thing with our existing grant is we didn't have a lot of strategies focusing on reducing ethnic and racial disparities. And what we have had they've fallen short. And so ideas that specifically address Native American needs is a focus for this grant renewal process. Largely because of the overrepresentation of Native Americans in our criminal justice system. On any given day, we have 20 to 25% of our population at the jail is Native American, while they only represent 3 to 4% in our county. So looking at more culturally appropriate practices to address recidivism, reentry, preventing criminal justice involvement to begin with is something that I'm hoping we can focus on in this renewal process.
You know, Kristen, as somebody of Native American descent, I understand and appreciate what you're saying and what's being proposed. But just bluntly, you have to go upstream. Because why are people being arrested and charged? And you go to the Native community and they all know who's going to get charged. The Native American in the room.
Yeah.
So that's a fact. Where do you think all of these folks in jail and women's prison, the men's prison across this state come from? They come from charges, felony charges. Then they get reduced to misdemeanors. So, because I have family, I have acquaintances, friends in the federal system, because the reservations are under the auspice of federal FBI and then in state. And that's what you hear, I'm the Indian in the room. Now I pass as white, so I don't get it as much. I'm the one that when I was growing up, I paid for the gas. I'm the one that went and bought stuff because the rest of my family's dark. So I'm the one that was in there. So you talk to folks, they're going to say, yeah, I'm the Indian in the room. Who's going to get arrested? Me. So that's why I'm saying, if you really want to address this issue, you're going to have to go up to how they got in this system. Yeah, once they're there, all this stuff I understand. But until that other happens, then you're always going to be confronted with, why is the statistic what it is? And that goes back to prosecutors. Why do they prosecute the way they do? And why do law enforcement arrest at such a high rate? And that's a tough one, because nobody is suggesting that everybody's a racist. In Indian country, we're taught all of us are related. You respect everybody. That's part of the ceremonies, the sacred ceremonies that have kept us alive for generations. So you can't have animosity and hatred in your heart. But when you're there and you see this happening, then you get that trauma, and then you come to expect that the system will do nothing but screw you over, and it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And for me and others, because I'm in my 70s, so I've seen this all my life, it's really tough when you see our young people, going into this despair because they've lost hope. That's what this system does. And so we all are here because we have hope. We have hope that we're going to do better. We do better. Things are much better. And that's because all of us are trying. And that's great. We have to remember that, because we need to remind ourselves of that, because some days get pretty tough for all of us in this work. So we have to remind ourselves that we're getting better. But if you don't have that hope, think about that. If you're in that despair, it's not clinical depression, it's worse, because to bring people out of that despair, you have to start to have them realize that there are people that care about them and that there is change. So that's why I bring that up. Yeah, this is not a criticism of what you're doing. It's going, I guess, upriver a little bit, and we have to address how we have especially Native people in such high percentages.
I really appreciate that comment. I want to ask you the impossible question, and maybe it's not. You mentioned changing how we arrest and changing how prosecutors prosecute. Can you think of any tangible actions that we could implement that would help with that?
Well,
and you may not.
Well, I think we have cues to people. Some we think are subtle, and but they scream to some people that they're not worthwhile. And
Are you talking
for
about
me-
implicit bias?
yes, and for me, just the system. You know, when you look at the public defenders who I've watched run from one courtroom to another, run from municipal court over to the courthouse because they have hearings. And then I sit and I watch the prosecutor. They're sitting at a computer. They have assistants. When that public defender comes in, he or she often has a paper file. They're looking through. They might say to the judge, Your Honor, you know, I just consulted with my client. They're overworked. For me and the people that I know, and having that system, you're really sending a cue to them that they're really not worthwhile, because their defense attorney is running. They know, everybody knows that, and they're not sitting in a chair. They don't have computers in front of them. They don't have assistant queuing up the charges, you know, and they don't have time. So we are sending a signal about who's worthy and who isn't. So, you know, there are those who say that, you know, the public defenders in a hearing will go last because those that are there with paid attorneys should go first. Well, what are you telling me? What are you saying to people? Well, we're not going to worry about those Indians. They can't make the bond anyway, so they got time, let them sit there. And till the non-Indian paid with a paid attorney gets to go first. So we're sending cues, and that's going back to that despair, because we keep giving these cues, and sometimes we think they're subtle. And again, I know that we can't take care of that here, but we can at least acknowledge it, that it could be better. And that's just me talking, but there are other things that we could do to maybe help. Subtle things, certainly all of the cultural stuff, but again, once you're in that system, and that's what we all say. I've had to have that talk with my son and my children about, if you get picked up, God damn it, don't say anything. Just smile, please. My God, don't say anything, because you're going to get charged with something. You know, I don't care if you think it's bogus. Please don't say anything. And why should that be? Because I'm afraid, as the rest of us are afraid, that they're going to get charged, and that's a prosecutor charging you.
Yep.
Can I say something?
Of course. I'd like to just open it up for discussion. I was just talking about some of the things we talked about earlier today to help drive the conversation a bit. So off you go.
Okay, so in my experience, you know, I do come across a lot of Native Americans, and it doesn't seem in my work that there's any difference between me working with somebody who's Native American or me working with somebody who's not Native American. When I make connection, it's a connection of hope, right? Which has no barriers, it has no race. I'm hearing a lot of things but there's no mention of a person with lived experience. Now, we've all known it's been done through the sequential mapping that peer support or somebody with lived experience is super important for things to be successful, because we do have people who sit behind computers. Sure, we have case managers, but case managers don't have the lived experience. Now, working in the field for 7 years now, the connection between people who are struggling and experiencing homelessness, or are trying to stay out of jail, or entering into a lifestyle that is going to lead up to some criminal stuff, people with lived experience, those are the ones who are going to be able to relate and to walk them calmly and give them hope and see that there's somebody that's been where they are. Now I've seen mention of case managers through a lot of the initiatives that we've talked about, but I haven't seen anything about somebody with lived experience. And I honestly believe, not just because I'm a peer support specialist and not just because that's my passion, is to get these folks hope and the support and a really healthy long-term relationship that's going to be there from the time they need the help until they don't need help anymore, and that's their decision. You know, I think that's very, very important, and I don't know how to incorporate that into this grant, but I feel like it's really like a person with lived experience fills in a lot of those things that we've talked about today. And although I'm not Native American, I connect with a lot of them and get them to the right places and hook them up with Ivan when he was around, like he was the greatest ever in the world, you know. So I think on the very, very bottom level, anybody with a lived experience is going to make that connection to get those people, whether they're Native American or drug addicts or homeless or anything, into the right path, right? And walk through it with them. So I'm not sure how we put that in there, but I think that a person with lived experience, and like I said before, it's been said that it's crucial. It's crucial for success in a lot of things. I've said it before, and I'm just going to say it again. I think where peer support and where mental health is really lacking is once we get these folks housed and serviced, they lose their connection with the people who got them where they are, right? So, oh, they're housed and they're fine and everything. It's not. Getting housed is so freaking scary. And the only person who's going to get them through that is somebody who's been there, done that. I don't know how to put myself into it, but I'm going to keep shouting it.
Yeah.
Experience is definitely needed in everything that we do.
Lori, is there a model within peer support that works with group work? Like, do peer support, especially with your specific training, do you do group work? You know, getting a group. So like, I'm just thinking particularly for these folks who have been housed and have been kind of supported into stabilization, but they need that ongoing support. Would a group atmosphere work where they could come to a meeting? Just connect.
And we're trying to come up with community meetings that cover lots of different areas.
Yeah.
And I will be the facilitator. And I'm also, you know, I've got that forensic peer support training behind me. So you know, being able to work with the public defender's office and all of that would be, I just think, a step in the right direction too.
So do you have any, do you have a couple proposals you could formally make? You don't have to do it right this second. But I'm just wondering, like, what if there were some formal proposals that, so I'm thinking perhaps a peer support, and I could just be making stuff up that is not relevant. So correct me if I'm off base, but I'm thinking like support groups where you have picnics, activities, and it's sponsored or run by peer support specialists. You know, I don't have any control over this, but I think it would be awesome to have peer support specialists as the warm handoff for folks who are being released from jail to kind of action a treatment plan that's based on risk and needs.
I think that the peer support would be vital for after, if, you know, during the crisis intervention team,
Yep.
you know, as the handoff.
Yes.
You know,
yep.
And I know that I've been working on proposals to try and, you know, put in these grants. It's unfortunate that peer support doesn't get paid unless they are attached to a agency, but that's just Medicaid. Like we
Okay.
don't get paid Medicaid unless we are grant funded, just like
Okay.
before.
So peer support specialists, just to make sure I understand, either get paid through Medicaid or through grant funds, basically. Like private insurance doesn't cover services from peer support specialists in general. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm not sure about private ones. I think that private ones do, because I do have a private pay,
Okay.
but I'm not sure if the insurance one does. I haven't really checked into it because it's always been cash.
Yeah.
And you know, this is Jim. Lori, we have talked at the Partners for Reintegration about how we could somehow as a community figure out how to use peer support specialists and that payment from Medicaid, because then that's not taking from money that could be used for other services that no one has funds for. And so that, I think you're right, that is something, if we could figure that system out better, so that, because Medicaid does, you know, want people to be well, and that's housing, and that's a whole lot of other things. And so the great thing is that the peer support specialists can bill Medicaid. I think we just need to develop, you know, maybe, I don't know, Lori, maybe more agencies or organizations or some way so that we have more folks out there getting paid.
We're working on a bill or a research or whatever it's called to add forensic peer support as a legit peer support, I don't know, need for Medicaid too. Because,
Yeah.
you know, it's really tough because an inmate comes through the system and they get hooked up with a lot of like agencies, Turning Point and stuff like that. But when they're done, they're done. Like they're not going to go back. And then they lose that support. But if they have somebody that's going to walk through them no matter what through the whole thing, it really does make a difference. And it made a difference for me. And it's made a difference for a lot of the people that I worked with.
Yeah.
But like you said, I've always been disappointed. So I've been trying really hard to try and figure out, there's a lot of us in Montana that want to go outside the box and start, you know, working with felons and people coming out of the system, because they're really getting failed.
Critical.
Like,
Well, Lori, I'm wondering if you and I can talk offline and maybe come up with a project proposal for consideration, because I'm sure that there's a model out there with some data, or you've got some ideas. I totally believe what you're saying. Research I've read shows that peer support specialists are critical for reducing recidivism. And I think it makes a lot of sense to see if we can come up with some ideas. And I'd love to talk to you more about that in the next couple of days if you have time and if your back's not hurting too much. Because I
did start an email to you today, and I then got busy, and it's still in process. So I'll finish it and send
call
it to you.
me. You can just call me. Yeah, but I agree. And I think too, another unfortunate thing is you just got to keep coming to every meeting and doing what you're doing, because eventually it's going to stick. I think I don't know if you can still hear me because you just froze on my end. Okay.
Oh no, I can.
Okay, yeah, and just keep talking about it until it starts sticking, because research, like I said, supports peer support specialists. So I just want to be aware of the time. We've got a few minutes left. It is the evening, but you know, it's the evening. So I'm wondering if, you know, anybody else has any things that they'd like to float for consideration in this grant. Danny, I hate to put you on the spot, but I might just call on you and see if you have any thoughts, because I know you have a lot of experience in this area. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on what we've talked about, and if you have anything to add. And if you don't, that's totally fine, because I'm putting you on the spot. So
Yeah, no, I've just been thinking about it, like just listening to what everyone else is saying, and yeah, I'm still trying to like articulate things in my mind. And I was actually wanting to talk to Ivan and my coworker Iku,
Mhm.
just because I know that they probably have really good ideas, and I maybe would want to bounce some ideas off of them
Excellent.
first. But yeah, I don't think I have like any like coherent thoughts right now,
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
yeah, I definitely want to like revisit this and talk more with, you know, people that are doing the work. Well, especially Ivan, just, you know, in
Yeah.
his position as the cultural liaison, and see like what he saw like on the ground.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I would love to hear what you guys come up with, or if I can be a fly on the wall in any conversations, or you could just email me. But I would love to hear what you guys are thinking in that space, because that's a pretty informed group of people you're talking about. So it would be really, I would love to hear what you think when you get your thoughts collected.
Yeah, I will keep you posted. But I actually have to hop off. But it was nice to meet all of you and see faces.
Yeah, thank you for
But
coming, Danny.
yeah,
All right, we'll
bye.
be in touch. Bye, Danny. Thanks for coming.
So Kristen, I have a question.
Mhm.
I have no creative brain cells at close to 8 in the evening. Whatever few I had, they're toast right now. But I would like to know, what the noon group said, and people here had really great ideas. What's the process like? Will you just go through those ideas and then see kind of which ones are most workable, or how? What do you
Yeah,
think?
that's a really good question, and I hate to admit it, but some of the processes are being developed as the days progressed. Because what I'm realizing is, I think it'd be really cool to put together just a simple template for a project idea that just has an overview, maybe talks about models where this type of suggestion exists elsewhere, and the success of it or lessons learned. But yeah, I'm thinking it might be good to put together a template and just have people be a little bit more formal. I kept track of kind of who said what in the earlier meeting. But the idea after that is to compile a big list and put it out for a vote to see what people want to put in this grant. We have had we've had CJCC representatives. I mean, we have 3 voting members in this meeting right now, and we had about 3 in our noon meeting. And so really, though, a lot of the ideas have come from everyone. And so the idea is then to just take it to vote. And it would be a vote for everyone, not just the CJCC, so that there's a bit of buy-in on and accountability. Say, hey, look, I voted for this initiative. What are you guys doing about it? Year down the line. So
Yeah, and some way of maybe being able to rank what they are in terms of importance and need, because
yeah, and you don't have to be creative to have good ideas. I know you know that. That's why you have the job you have, Terry. So yeah, but Jim, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more offline as well, and see how we can kind of streamline some of the work that you guys are doing into a more public space, because I just feel kind of ignorant in that I don't know what's going on at HRC, but you guys, your work affects everyone. I've benefited from HRC in a previous life, and it's a really important missing link that I would like to bring in, at least in this particular space, that I would like to make sure gets a really loud voice because of the awesome things that you guys do. So
Yeah, sure. Yes.
yeah, and plus I kind of want to have a coffee with you anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any other ideas? I don't know if folks want to get off the line. It is after 8 o'clock. I can stick around for a bit. I did kind of cover most of the ideas that we talked about earlier today, just in that, in general, really looking at programming in the jail to make sure that it's based in best practices, so that we're using that time wisely. The jail is full of volunteers that go in and to no fault of anyone's, I think that maybe it's time to have a look at what, what programming is available in the jail and see if we can't swap it up a bit to fall in line with best practices and research-based programming. Like some of the stuff I've read speaks strongly about, emotional intelligence and decision-making skills. Like everybody kind of knows how to look for a job, but having a good decision-making skills and emotional regulation, from what I've read, is a really helpful piece of programming. It doesn't have to be all end all, but it's helpful. Some of the other big ideas we talked about, which was rental and housing assistance, but then looking at funding for drug treatment and monitoring. Again, Tom, I don't know if this is possible. This is probably not outside of the scope of the grant because it needs to be a bit more sustainable. But maybe even just looking into best practices in monitoring and GPS monitoring and drug monitoring. Let's see, just going through my notes really quick. We also talked about a Native American diversion team, which I think I touched on a little bit earlier, and also a Native American treatment court. There's one in Great Falls that is about a year old and has had some really great, reviews coming out of it. The participants have been really happy with the culturally relevant programming that they got in lieu of jail time, which makes some sense. It would, of course, come with participation and capacity of the courts, because you have to have somebody who's qualified run those types of programs. And I know our courts are really busy and full with other programs and just day to day.
Have we really talked about drug court?
We haven't, but we have Judge Halligan on the line who could tell you all about it.
Right, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, Judge, would you mind talking a little bit about your treatment court, or I could if you want.
Sure, I'm sorry, I just took a minute to unmute. So the treatment court is focused primarily on felony offenders who have either petitions to revoke because they have been unsuccessful seeking their own treatment in the community. So rather than bump them immediately to a higher level of care or a correctional placement, gives them an opportunity to receive a greater level of support with the hope that they can be successful in the community. It does not kind of discriminate with regard to race. So we have both, we've recently admitted a fairly young Native young man. And then we have folks who are, 10 years older, 15 years older. So we, at this point, have 2 people waiting. We just started this month, 2 people in the court. We have 2 people soon to enter, and I suspect that we'll have more. But in part, some of the hurdles we have are, of course, accessing treatment and other supportive services. So I know this afternoon we mentioned, or Representative Dudick mentioned, that there might be some funding available for employment programs. And so that is something that we're going to also look into. But I do think that it can be a very productive way to keep people in the community and to also kind of walk with them hand in hand to achieve success, as opposed to plopping them into a correctional placement and then pulling them out and really having all the issues of reestablishing themselves in the community and the struggles that they often encounter. So I'm hopeful that we will have some successes. But of course, I'm interested in people's viewpoints as well about ways to improve that, or if there are other needs for treatment or supportive services, that we incorporate them into that program as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I did fail to mention that. Representative Dudick mentioned today that there is money available for job training. So I have a note here that says, check with Kim about this. So I need a little more information. But so yeah, we did talk about some, kind of like what you brought up already, Jim, just some stuff that's already available that can be really helpful in addressing recidivism or reentry or criminal justice involved, barriers to being criminal justice involved. So there are, that's the benefit too of the CJCC, is it's a place hopefully where folks can come together and share ideas about what is happening in the community, and people can go, oh, I'll give you a ring because I actually was looking for a program just like this and didn't know it existed. So we're getting there. We are definitely getting there as far as getting more collaborative and coordinated. There was one other thing that we talked about today. So Kim Leahy from Probation and Parole talked about drug laws. I think she made a really good point about how punitive our drug laws are, especially for kind of low count prescribed medications. She was saying one Loratab, one Adderall is a felony. It's a felony offense. And then talking about kind of our DUI laws where it takes 4 to become a felony. And so I guess the opposite of the prescription drug stuff, where maybe we need to tighten up on DUIs and loosen up on prescription drugs. And I was just reading an article tonight where Oregon has on the ballot initiative to just erase all drug fees and fines and charge $100 administrative fee. And so it'll be really interesting to see if that passes. And if so, what the data shows, because folks do collect a lot of fines and fees. That's another project. Actually, somebody rang me after the meeting today, and she was really interested in doing a research project into fines and fees with the court. And Chantal, I know you definitely talked about, you know, kind of how RBS has got some funding tied to court fees and how there might be some unintended consequences in reviewing fines and fees. But, you know, just looking at our fines and fees structure and see if there are other models out there that potentially could do what we're hoping they could do without causing a big financial burden on clients that they'll have a really hard time to get out of. So hiring a consultant to do a research project on our fines and fees structure here in Missoula County and seeing if there are recommendations that could be made to still get done what we need to do, but not cause as much harm. So
absolutely. And just to chime in on that, you know, crime victim services, which would much rather be funded through, say, tax dollars than fines and fees. And so, in fact, when it's come up in the legislature, the Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence and membership programs lobbied against increasing fees, just for the fact that sometimes in domestic violence relationships, it doesn't even end up being the person who's causing the harm who's paying the fee. It continues to be the person who has been experiencing the harm. But it does nothing for the family. It does nothing for restoring balance in the family or for anybody getting help. And, you know, we'd much rather have harmony and restoration than just people getting fined.
Yeah. Yeah, and a little more sustainability. I mean, yeah, we've already talked about it, but just more sustainability in a different fees, in a different budget line, basically.
So in terms of ideas, I emailed this to you, and so I'll just mention it briefly. But one of the things,
email? Did you just email? Oh, you did just email.
I did. So I came out of violence services, victim services, which really grew out of movement building and campaigning. And I do think that this work would benefit from movement building and campaigning, which it has been doing at a national level, but bringing that to a local level, and having communication strategies and a communication person who would deliver those. Everything from report writing and, you know, making them super flashy and making sure it's in front of the media to the marketing. But really, in order to change legislation, we need to be pulling community levers in a way that all the good work might not ever get the attention it needs unless there's somebody who's also shining a spotlight on it. And I was just thinking about some of the things that happened on this call, like hearing what's going on at HRC and how that relates. Having a communications person who can just create a really huge megaphone for talking about all those things to help educate the community, to help educate our lawmakers, but then put pressure on our electeds to keep funding this work.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking with the MacArthur grant, we do have access to consultants, but I'm wondering, Tom, I might put you on the spot now and see, is that something that M&R could be a part of, or are they kind of, are they meant to get that heavily involved in a local area, or is this something more that would be a better permanent position?
We can definitely ask. They do have resources available to come in and provide planning for communications and so forth, so it's a possibility.
Okay. Yeah,
and I was just...
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chantal.
I was thinking, 911 and the sheriffs have a public relations officer, and it's they're 24/7 promoting, and so it's good to have that message promoted.
Yeah, that's interesting. 24/7 communications officer for our new merger.
Yeah, and I mean, social media, some really flashy posters.
Yeah, no, I'm the Jane of all trades right now. I handle the social media as well.
I know, it's a lot.
I was busy today.
So
Yeah,
Chantel, this is Judge Halligan. So that thought also came up this afternoon about
good.
doing some public outreach and actually just even developing a campaign and hiring someone to promote that campaign. And so I do think that that's a very good idea and necessary, especially Kristen does have millions of things on her plate and she's done a fabulous job kind of trying to get outreach, but to actually have a kind of a professional develop strategic campaigns for communication to gather more public involvement and just public awareness would be very helpful.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Today I was on a webinar training from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and I went into it really somewhat cynically because the training was called asset framing, and so it's sort of like, for me, it's like, okay, another buzzword or thing that everybody will talk about, just like we talked about paradigms for a while, and now you move on to the next thing. But I was really impressed with the training. I thought it was really good, and it kind of goes to Jim's earlier point when you really think about how you talk about certain people and that it sets up an expectation, so that if you are always talking about people as being challenged or this or that, then that's the message that you have about them, and that it's then the public then is sort of not really surprised that they end up in jail because you set them in, and so it's like, well, if somebody has that many challenges and they're doing whatever, then so I think the company, they're going to do some more trainings. That one of the things the person said was they're not talking about spin, they're really using real data and not not just saying, okay, we won't refer to it as a problem, we'll call it a challenge, but it's just still how you frame people or how you set up a situation then is going to determine what happens further down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that also touches on something that I've thought a lot about too, which is about how our local newspaper, publishes the DUI list and the arrest data and the sexual and violent offender registry. And I just wonder about the value in that, especially with arrest data, because a lot of folks end up, they could plea, they could have charges dropped. And so they've got their name in the paper for a crime that they may have pled out or dropped, or everybody knows. And I don't know how useful that is in shaming people. And so as part of kind of reframing the message, it's critical in this space. Even I think the use of the term felon and convicts are really harmful. And so that's an interesting idea, really.
And I noticed the local paper you mentioned, Kristen, they used to have that list and they would say Native American. So some of us were saying, well, why don't you say Irish or Norwegian, but I've noticed they've dropped that, which I think is, I don't know why, but they deserve some kudos for that, because I've noticed that at least the last few times I look, that descriptor, because why?
Yep. Just to continue to shame, really, and to keep folks in that where we need them to be, so that they know they've harmed our society, which is, it's not helpful in the long run. It just isn't at all.
Right.
Yeah, interesting ideas. Tom, put you on the spot one more time. Do you know of any other areas that have a communications strategist of sorts? That is that something that potentially could be considered in the MacArthur grant? And again, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, and you can just say you don't know or whatever, but.
I want to say yes, but I can't say for certain.
Yeah.
I know that some counties have like a public relations officer on staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our communications department kind of they just reshuffled. But you know, having somebody, so we don't, yeah, having somebody specific in the space would be super amazing. We definitely have our communications department, but they work for everybody. Yeah, interesting. Okay, thank you. Any other ideas you guys want to chat about? Right here. Well, I think all of you know this already, but just, you know, ways to stay in touch, check our social media. You can always email me. I think everybody here has my email. Yep. And reach out anytime. So this grant is due at the end of September, and there's a lot of work to be done in between now and then. But I would like to keep you all involved if you'd still like to be involved in figuring out what ones to finalize, to pick and finalize. So otherwise, that's it.
Thanks so much, Kristen, for making this happen.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all, and
Thank
we'll
you.
see you next time.
Stay
Great.
safe.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.